Hey sunshine! I'm Cady, and you're watching Dark Sunlight. I hope you're all doing well. The weather is finally turning to spring where I am, so that has really lifted my mood a bit. I'm excited to be able to spend a little more time hanging out on my balcony and enjoying the tulips that have started blooming in my neighbor's garden beneath it. I'm super excited to show you how I've set up my bullet journal for June because, frankly, I think this is my favorite setup of 2020 so far. But first, let's take a quick look at how May is going so far. First, we had my quote page and monthly log, then my gratitude and mood page and my media page, then my productivity tracker. A lot of people were curious about how this spread would work out for me, and I ended up really enjoying it. It made me realize that I was sometimes more productive than I realized, just in different ways. So I will be recreating this in this new setup as well, just with a few adjustments, which I will talk about later. So after that, there's just my weekly spreads, which also included a habit tracker on the side. I really enjoyed the Dutch door layout again this month, but for this new setup, I'll be changing it up just to keep things fresh. And now we're all set for setting up for June. You can find any and all of the supplies I use in this video in the kit link in the description below. Let's get into it. For my cover page this month, I wanted to create a wreath design, so I started by marking out a circle in the center of the page and then sketched in some flowers at the bottom of it. My favorite place to learn how to do botanical drawings is either Bonjournal on Instagram or Shada Campbell on YouTube. I will link both in the description if you want some great flower tutorials. Here I decided on a sort of generic flower in the center, flanked by 2 azaleas on either side. I like to start by sketching really loosely and messily, then lighten all the lines with my kneaded eraser, and then draw a little more cleanly, choosing my favorite lines of what I've previously sort of scribbled. Once I had the flowers sketched in, I added some vines to either side of them, following the shape of the circle. Once that was done, I started sketching in the details of 2 feathers that would be hanging from the wreath. Seeing as this month I'm taking inspiration from the zodiac sign Gemini, and Gemini is represented by the twins, I kept a lot of things as sets of 2. 2 azaleas, 2 feathers, etc. When the feathers were done, I went back to the flowers to add a little more details and leaves. When I was happy with the sketch, I traced all the main lines with my 0.3 fine liner, added 20/20 to the top of the wreath just a little off center, and filled in the rest of the circle shape with dots. When that was done, I wrote June in the center of the wreath in a very elongated style of cursive. Then I grabbed my 0.05 fine liner and went back to add details to the feathers, flowers, and leaves. When I was happy with how the cover was looking, I moved over to the left page where I planned to illustrate a quote. I decided to add swashes of color to the page using a technique I last used in my February setup. All you need to do is grab some plastic, I used a sandwich bag, and scribble onto it with some markers. To add some varying texture, I also spray it with a tiny bit of water and then wipe off all the excess before pressing it to my page. I was also careful to have another clean paper towel next to me to blot up the excess water after I've applied the color to avoid my pages from buckling too much. The last time I used this technique, I scribbled a lot of colors together on the plastic so they'd mingle and blend, but this time I applied each color separately because I wanted to distinctly have yellow and pink and avoid them blending to make an orange color. Gemini's color is yellow, and I hate to say it, but yellow is not my favorite color, so I decided to add pink into this setup to create a warm, summery color palette that I would love throughout the month and not get sick of. I did originally sketch out where I wanted the words for the quote to go, but the color covered some of it, so I probably should have done the quote before adding the color, but I really wanted to avoid it smudging from all the water and ink. I could still see some of my pencil lines though, so I just went with it and did the best I could. The quote I went with is, "Sometimes good things fall apart, so better things can fall together," which was said by Marilyn Monroe, who was a Gemini. For the fonts in this quote, I used a tall, thin printing, my regular printing, a typewriter style, and that same elongated script I'd used for the month on the cover page. Underneath the quote, I started with a circle shape and then sketched in a very stylized combination of the elemental symbol for air and the glyph for Gemini. I kept all the lines very straight because I wanted it to resemble a jewel. I didn't want to lose all the texture of the colors underneath it, so I colored it in lightly with colored pencils that matched the colors of the tombos I was using. Then I took my white gel pen and highlighted some of the corners to make it look more shiny. After that, I jumped back to the cover page and added some light color with the colored pencils to the flowers and feathers as well. On the next page, I wanted to set up my monthly spread. I started by adding June to the top of the page with the same script I used on the previous page, and then I started on setting up the calendar. I also did something really different this time in that I decided to use a ruler. I am usually much too lazy to use a ruler because it makes everything take so much longer, and I'm a fan of the slightly less perfect hand-drawn look anyways, but this time I was just craving that sort of more perfected, crisp style, mainly to contrast with the very messy texture of color I'll be adding later. I also decided to add some simple social trackers to the right side of the calendar. I mentioned in a previous setup that I don't really need them in my monthlies because I have a page at the beginning of my journal to track this info, but I sometimes forget to go back and update that page, and I wanted these more in my face to keep me motivated. So after drawing in most of the calendar lines, I laid down some washi tape, one box below each line so that I could swipe my Tombow marker across the row and get a perfectly clean line when I removed the tape. I used the yellow Tombow for the social trackers and a pink on the calendar, and then went over the weekend days twice so that they would be a darker shade of pink. When the color was added, I went back and added all the vertical lines to the calendar. Then I used my circle stencil and added a circle above each day as well as slightly bigger ones for the social trackers. After filling them all in with black, I used my white gel pen to write in the days of the week and the YouTube and Instagram logos. Then I added a light gray drop shadow around the calendar and social boxes. Next, I just started splotching more of that marker color around the title. Then I added more washi tape to protect the bottom section of the calendar and social trackers and added more texture there as well, rotating between the yellow, the dark pink, and the light pink colors. On the next page, I wanted to set up a habits and mood tracker. I'm still avoiding a more detailed health tracker like I used to do because I just don't need the reminder that I'm not getting any steps. This month I'll be tracking journaling, my skincare routine in both the morning and evening, taking my vitamins, stopping work past 6 p.m., and flossing. Underneath the habit tracker, I decided to try a style of mood tracker that I love in other people's journals, but I've never used myself. Normally, I'm more about data tracking in more of a graph or chart style, but I totally love the look of people's habit trackers that are usually cute drawings filled in with colors that are associated with a certain mood. So I decided to draw out 3 feathers and simplify my moods to just the 3 colors I've been using throughout this setup. Yellow for not so great, dark pink for so-so, and light pink for happy. Then I'll be dividing the feathers into 30 sections so I can color in each section for how I'm feeling that day. I wanted to keep this spread very airy with lots of white space and more simplified colors because I was trying to keep in mind that it will become much more colorful as the habit and mood trackers get filled in throughout the month. So the only decoration I added to this page was around the border. First, I blocked it all off with washi tape to protect the layout I'd drawn, and then went back in with that wet marker technique using only the light pink to add texture all around the edges. After peeling up the edges, I went back in with a bit more color on a paintbrush to make the edges a little bit more defined, and then I added the little smiley faces to the color code underneath the feathers. On this next page, I'll be setting up another productivity level board. If you want to know more about this spread, I talked about it at length in my May setup, so if you haven't seen it already, I can link it above. The first thing I did was create a Dutch door to write my key on. One thing that ended up bothering me in this spread last month was that the key divided my title in 2. So this time I made it shorter and removed the top section so that the title would be fully visible. I also used a corner punch to round out the corners. So the first thing I really did on this spread was make a mistake. From the angle I was sitting at, it appeared to me as if I had sketched the second half of the title in the wrong place, so I erased my sketch, which was correct, and rewrote it 1 square higher. I wasn't sure at first if I was going to leave it that way or correct it, so I just moved on with the setup. I decided again to use a ruler for this setup, which of course took ages because there's so many lines in this grid. Another change I made this time is to leave a space between the levels and the plan sections, which gave me one less square in the planning section, but that's okay because I didn't actually use more than 3 squares to plan hardly at all in May. I also wanted to keep things more airy and light because this is another spread that's going to get very colorful as it gets filled in, so I wanted the lines to be only black and light gray. I also simplified the left side of the page by just writing in the dates instead of the days of the week as well. I already have black divider lines to divide out the weeks, so I felt like I didn't really need both. Next, I added the color bars to my key. I'm keeping the same 3 sections as I did last month. So yellow will be for work or dark sunlight tasks, dark pink for home-related things, and light pink for personal things. At this point, I did finally decide to erase my little mistake with a white gel pen because I had a plan to add more texture up there, so I thought it would be easy to hide the correction. And I knew that leaving it that way would just bother me every time I saw it. While I waited for the white gel pen to dry, I added the boxes to the key section, rewrote the second half of the title, and then blocked off the top of the page with washi tape. Next, I added texture to the top, again, only using the light pink so it's not too wild when all the color on the page itself is filled in at the end of the month. Then I just added the titles to each section and worked on adding the symbols to my key. Most of the symbols are the same as last month, I just simplified some and removed or combined a few. I do want to take a second here to recognize my newest patrons, Jessica and Jenna. Thanks for supporting the channel, I'm super grateful. If you want to see your name in the credits of every video, come join the team over on Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description below. On the next page, I wanted to set up my first weekly of the month. Although I was totally loving the Dutch doors I used for both April and May, it really locked me into one style of setup for the whole month, and I often like to change things up as I go depending what I have going on that week. So for this one, I wanted to, again, keep the actual layout very simple because I'd be adding tons of color and texture like I did on the cover page. So just like the other pages, I blocked off where I'd set up my weekly with some washi tape and then splattered those colors all around it. I wanted to make sure I got right up to the edges where I could because I wanted to use minimal black lines, so I would be using this color to define the edges of the boxes in some places. Next, I added my black lines and then blocked off the top row with washi so I could add a gray bar. Then I just wrote in the abbreviations of each day into each box and left the last one for notes. In the top right corner of the page, I wanted to bring back the flowers from the cover page, so I sketched those in, outlined them in pen, added details, and added color just like I did on the cover page. And that's it. Let's take a look at how everything turned out. Don't forget that I have a printable version of this setup that you can print and use in your own journal, as well as desktop and phone backgrounds with a quote page available for my patrons. So be sure to check out my Patreon if you're interested in any of those. The link will be below. I hope I've done my Gemini sunshines proud with this setup. Let me know in the comments if you're a Gemini so I can wish you a happy birthday. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.